Rick Santorum to come up here. Let's give him a round of applause. Well, Senator, we're going to start off. We're going to make this very casual. Pretend we're sitting in a booth at a restaurant talking casually about the Constitution. And so...
Doesn't everybody?
This is what y'all talking when you're sitting at IHOP, right? Senator, I would like to go ahead and have you just introduce yourself real quick to the audience and tell them a little bit about your background, because when you've talked to me in the past, I always found it fascinating how you got into politics and the odds that you overcame to get to where you were and how you would get to the U.S. Senate. So you got to give folks a little
Well,
background.
thank you. I appreciate that. And can everybody hear me okay? Can the cameras give me a thumbs up so they can do it? Well, first, thank you for the opportunity, Alan. It's great to be with you. It's an honor to be here with the great leader of the state and great family, you and your dad, and been serving the people of South Carolina for quite some time, and it's an honor to be here. First thing I always do, talk about family, is talk about my family. Karen and I have been married for 25 years. We have 7 children that we are raising, and 2 of them I pay a lot of money to go to the Citadel because we are out of state, and so I'm honored to be here with one of my 2 sons. My son Daniel's here; he's a junior here at the Citadel. My other son John, my other son John was at lunch, so that just gives you an idea. That really sums up both of them actually pretty well. Daniel's here with the policy, and John was at the lunch. But it's really great to have that connection here to Charleston, and we are great fans of this great institution, and very, very proud of the work that they've done in helping to shape my 2 sons. So I'm very grateful for that. Look, by way of background, my political career started very much like my presidential races. Someone who was considered a non-factor, someone who had no chance of winning, who went out and stood for what I believed in and worked harder than everybody else. That's sort of been the MO. When I ran against an incumbent congressman, someone who had all the money, all in a 60% Democratic district, had 14-year incumbent, and had never been seriously challenged. And I went out and knocked on close to 20,000 doors along with my wife, and my family's always been involved in our campaigns. And we pulled off such a big upset that on the night that that we won, the Associated Press, when they released the results, just put the name of the person who lost, didn't put my name in the release. They just said this incumbent lost, but they didn't say who won. And I suspect the reason was because the Wall Street Journal wrote a little article about this the next day. And so they got this release from the AP saying this congressman lost. And so they wanted to write about, well, who won. And so they called the Republican National Congressional Committee, which, as you know, is the campaign committee for the House Republicans. And they said, we have this thing in the 18th district. Who was your candidate? And they didn't have my name. That's how much of a long shot I was in this race. And we've sort of been blessed by that, because every race I ran, I was a long shot, and so I went in there with the understanding that I was probably going to be there 2 years, and so I didn't worry about doing anything except the right thing. And I went to. They're telling me now to hold it up. Okay. I went to Washington and simply told the truth, fought for what I believed in, and didn't worry about Democrat, Republican, worked about doing what was right for the country. And it worked out pretty well in some respects. I got reelected, but in a new district, because we had lost 2 seats, probably to South Carolina, in Pennsylvania, because South Carolina's grown and we were not. And so what happened is they put my district into 3 different districts and eliminated my seat. And they put me in with a 28-year Democratic incumbent in a district that was 70% Democratic registration. And I went out and did the same thing. But I had now a reputation of being a fighter, someone who was out there standing for reform and for really changing things in Washington. And in 1992, when I ran for re-election, George Bush Sr. got 29% in my district, and I got 61. And so then I turned around and ran for the United States Senate against another incumbent Democratic senator. I share this with you because there aren't very many people in this race, I can't think of any, who have defeated one incumbent, much less knocked 3 out of office, and done so in heavily Democratic districts and states. And if you're looking for someone that actually has run against the Clinton machine, I ran against the Clinton machine in 1994. I ran against the author, a Democratic incumbent who was the author of HillaryCare. And I had James Carville and Paul Begala run the race against us in 1994, the Clinton operatives, 2 years after Bill Clinton got elected. And I just share that with you, and that if you're looking for someone who's actually gone toe-to-toe with the operation that whoever wins this nomination has gone toe-to-toe, and in a state like Pennsylvania, which we haven't won as a Republican nominee for president, we haven't won since 1988. I think we bring a little something different to the table. And I would end with this. We went to Washington and had a strong, principled, conservative voting record representing a state that, frankly, is a very hard thing to do. I mean, I don't represent South Carolina. I represent a state with 1.5 million more Democrats and Republicans, and they're real Democrats. And yet, we were able to win re-election and accomplish a lot and get things done on national security, on pro-life, on health care, on welfare reform. All of those things we have really signature accomplishments for the Republican Party. I led the charge on a lot of those things. And that's what I try to bring to the table here in this race. Someone who's been a fighter, who's won in tough races against the best that they have to offer, and someone who can go to Washington, D.C. and actually win. One thing to say you're going to fight, it's another thing to win. And I'm not interested in just fighting to lose. I'm interested in fighting to win.
Thank you, Senator Santorum. I found your story compelling, and I've heard you say it a couple of times, and I wanted you to share with folks in the room who had that opportunity to hear. Very powerful story. Now, jumping into the meat of the moment, the first thing I want to talk about is the Supreme Court. As you heard in my opening remarks, that 4 Supreme Court justices who were born in the 1930s will be in their 80s when the next president assumes office. So you could, if you let the president could appoint up to 4 Supreme Court justices. What types of individuals would you appoint to the court? And what are the questions you would want the answers to from them before nominating them for the U.S. Senate?
Well, obviously, you talked about their judicial philosophy. I believe I'm an originalist. I believe that that's how you should interpret the Constitution. It constrains the federal government and maximizes our liberties. And I think that, and it doesn't infuse the court into the areas of where the founders anticipated the people to be the ones to decide through their elected officers. And so I believe in a very limited role of the court. I'm a lawyer. Sorry, I am. 2 of them up here. But what I was taught in law school was the Supreme Court was supposed to decide the issue before it in as narrow a way possible to resolve the dispute. That was how the court was supposed to act. It wasn't supposed to reach out beyond what is necessary to resolve the dispute, and that's changed, and it's wrong. It's not the role of the court to do that. And so I will be looking at people who understand that philosophy. But that's not enough, because I'm sure you know, maybe you don't, but I'm sure you've had some people come and talk to you and who are running for office and tell you that they're going to do certain things, and then they go and do something completely different. And as you know, that happens with Supreme Court nominees too, all too frequently. And I believe one of the reasons it happens is because of the culture in which they live. I had an interesting conversation with one of the Supreme Court justices, about 10 years ago when I was in the Senate. We were having lunch together and just sort of talking about things. And I was complaining about this, and how justices, so many of them come and they say they're going to do one thing, and you think they're going to be really good, and then they come into there and they just move away. And his response was, well, it's the town. So a lot of it is the city in which we're in. And he said, because you're surrounded by government. You're surrounded by power. You're surrounded, number one. And number two, all of the social circles are people in and used to and attached to power of government. And most of them, because of that, are not, do not see the limits on the Constitution that the American public does. And so if you want to be invited, he said this, if you want to be invited to the parties, if you want to be accepted in the social circles, if you want to be approved by the media that your kids read and your family reads, then there's a lot of pressure to conform. And he said to me, he said, that's why after World War II, the Germans, when setting up their high court, didn't set it up in Berlin. They set it up someplace outside the halls of government, out where the people are, out in the hinterlands, the equivalent of Sioux City, if you will. And to make sure that the people were surrounded by the ordinary German, not the person who's in the halls of power. And so now why do I give that very long explanation? I'm going to be looking for someone that has roots. Someone that has real roots that in their life, that I know when the winds come a-buffeting, their roots are going to hold them solid. And that's not necessarily legal roots. It's personal roots, it's family roots, it's faith roots, it's all these other types of roots which I think are much more important. And finally, and this is the last point I'll make, I'm going to look for someone with humility. If the person is the most popular person, has been acclaimed and lauded and is seen as this brilliant jurist and this brilliant lawyer, I'm not going to touch him with a 10-foot pole. Because too many of those guys believe their press clippings and they like to read those press clippings, and when they get into the court, they're going to want nice press clippings. And I don't want a judge who is concerned about nice press clippings.
Amen.
As the state's chief legal officer, I share this and I lament this with my colleagues who are AGs in other states, that we have struggled with President Obama's frequency to defy the Constitution, circumvent the will of Congress, the people's elected representatives, to ignore them, and to govern by executive fiat, either through his executive orders or through administration officials. There have been a number of executive actions. One several years ago was Yucca Mountain. 30 years Congress, in a bipartisan fashion, had designated Yucca Mountain as a nuclear repository for the waste of the states. And they spent billions with a B, almost like a lottery.
You were taxing billions.
You spent billions of dollars to do impact studies, and it was agreed upon by both sides. And then the president, through his Secretary of the Department of Energy, basically unilaterally said, oh, by the way, before I tell you, South Carolina was the third highest state paying into that nuclear waste fund, I think to the tune of over $2 billion. And these are fees that are collected every time you pay a utility bill. Okay, that's tacked on top of the tax, it's tacked on top of the actual bill. And you paid that, and the administration said you can keep your waste, we'll keep the money. We obviously sued, the courts ruled in our favor, although there's no money to continue Yucca Mountain because it was shuttered. The whole project was shuttered, and we all know why. It was there. Immigration was what the president did last year. He talked about his phone and his pen, and that he was just going to unilaterally rewrite immigration laws. My question to you is, which of the president's executive actions do you disagree with most and why? And I may have identified one already, but...
both of those I disagree with, and I would go through with a whole bunch of others that he has put forward on environmental executive actions and regulations. Because you can't really just leave executive actions, people think of executive orders, but that's only a piece of the executive actions that the president, in my opinion, has abused his authority. And you have executive orders which are directly from the president and out of the Oval Office, but then you have a lot of regulations that are pursuant to statute that are done at the department level. And then you have other executive actions that aren't even that formal, which are administrative interpretations or administrative actions, which are interpretations of regulations that are changed at the grassroots level of an agency. In all three of those situations, what I've seen is a huge abuse of authority and a president who is willing to contravene the direct, both constitutional, statutory, and regulatory language that is in place to accomplish what he wants to accomplish. And so the question is, when a president abuses his authority like that, what is your remedy? And right now, the Congress has attempted to do some remedy by going to court in some of these cases. They have on the issue of immigration, for example. They have on the issue of ObamaCare, for example. And they've gone to court and they've tried to stop the president from doing it. So I think that's appropriate to do it. But that's not really enough number one. And number two, the president, and this is a good thing, the president's actions, all of them, can be overturned. All the executive orders can be repealed and replaced or just repealed. All of the regulations can be suspended. I mean, you can go ahead and suspend a regulation immediately on the first day of office, as well as you can change the administrative rulings. But the problem with that is that 4 years, 8 years later, and somebody else comes back into the other party, and then we're back at it the same way again. And so I really have started to look at, is there anything we can do that's going to curb the ability for the president to abuse his power? And there really isn't. That I've thought about this. I can't think of anything that can do so with executive orders, because that's certainly clearly within the purview of the president. But there is a way to do it with respect to regulations. And there's something called the Congressional Review Act, which is an act that says that if a regulation has an impact of over a certain amount of money on the economy, that the Congress has the right to review the regulation and disapprove it. And that process is used on occasion. Here's the problem. The House will go ahead and disapprove it if it's Republican control. We'll go ahead and disapprove it. But it goes to the Senate, you need 60 votes to disapprove, and so it never happens. And so the president, because he's had either control of the Congress or because he has sufficient control to get 60 votes, to stop 60 votes from the Senate, none of these regulations have ever been disapproved. So I think what I'm going to do is come in, change all the things I said I would change, and then I'm going to make an offer to the Congress to begin to take some back of the power that they should have. And that is to change the Congressional Review Act to, instead of a resolution of disapproval, it has to be a resolution of approval. In other words, for the regulation to go into effect, a regulation is written pursuant to a statute. And so I would think that the people who actually wrote the statute, did all the legwork in putting the statute together, should have more say in the regulations pursuant to that statute. So when it comes to any kind of major regulation that has that kind of economic impact on the country, I'm going to propose that Congress has to approve it by a majority vote in the House and a 60% vote in the Senate. And if it doesn't get approved, it doesn't go into effect.
Okay. Earlier, I referenced the immigration lawsuit that I joined Texas. I say I, the state of South Carolina, joined the state of Texas and 25 other states challenging the president's executive authority last year. But that begs the larger question about the immigration problem. What do you feel needs to be done to solve or address the illegal immigration problem in the United States?
Now, when you hear the word immigration reform or the problem of immigration, what immediately pops into your head? If you can visualize an individual or a group of individuals, who do you visualize? Come on, who do you visualize?
Folks from Latin America.
Yeah, Mexicans who are here, Mexicans or Latin Americans who are here illegally. Now, when I say healthcare reform, who do you visualize? Do you visualize Americans who are in need of healthcare? When I say tax reform, who do you think about? Well, you think about yourself. You think about other Americans who want. But for some, when you think of immigration, you don't think about how it affects you, how it affects Americans. Every policy we put forward, the way we should look at it is, what is the best policy for America? Not what's the best policy, particularly in the case of immigration. We think of what's the best policy. When you think of immigration, you think of people who are here illegally. It's like thinking of tax reform and say, well, how does it treat people who cheat on their taxes? Nobody ever asks that question. But we've been convinced that that is who is most of concern to us when it comes to the issue of immigration. And that's why people are ticked off. Because you've got a lot of people who are impacted by immigration and no one seems to care about them. The bottom line is, over the last 20 years, 35 million people have come into this country, both legally and illegally. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing. But the reality is it's had an impact. And the impact is a lot of different ways. But I'll just look at it from the standpoint of American workers who are struggling in America today. The last 20 years, that same 20-year period, we've seen wages go up by the lowest percentage of any 20-year period in American history. We've seen, if you go back to the year 2000 and look forward through 2014, There were 5.7 million net new jobs created. You know what percentage of those net new jobs created are held by people who were not born in this country? All of them. There were fewer native-born Americans working at the end of 2014 than there was in 2000, yet there's 17 million more in the workforce. You see, supply and demand does work, and people who are coming here particularly illegally, and even those legally, were willing to work for less than what maybe some Americans would be willing to work for. And so now there are lots of complicating factors here, like government programs and the like. I get that. But the reality is that we have an issue with the impact of immigration on American workers and wage earners, not salaries, but wage earners. And so I've taken the position that we need to look at immigration from the standpoint of the American worker, and we have to do two things. Number one, we have to change the way we structure our legal immigration system, and we have to take the people who are in this country, some 12 million, and ask them politely to go home. And I will lay out how we will get them to go home. And then finally, but really first, we need to secure the southern border. Those are the steps that we need to take. Secure the border, and then first, we have to take this. Roughly half of the people who are here illegally are here on visa overstays. That means they came here on a student visa, they came on a visitor visa, they came on a work visa, and they didn't go home. And so we know their names. We probably know how to get a hold of them. We probably know where they live. We have bioidentifiers so we can track where they are if we need to. And what we need to say to them, here's the deal. You got 3 months. Get your affairs together, and you go home. This is not your poor huddled masses yearning to be free. These are folks working for Google. These are people who've gone to colleges. These are people who are here on vacation and decided to stick around. And we're saying, no, it's time to go home. If you go home during that 3-month period of time, no harm, no foul. You can get back in line and get another visa. If you want to immigrate into this country, you go through the immigration process. We're not going to put any penalties or fines, but you got to leave within 3 months. If you don't, and then we find you, we will deport you and you will never come back again. We will bar you permanently from entering the United States. Now, I suspect that a large percentage of the 6 million people will not stick. They will go home. So now you cut your problem in half. And then you hear, well, what are we going to do? I was in Storm Lake, Iowa. There's a Tyson's food plant. You know Tyson's, the chicken folks. There's a Tyson's food plant there, and you can imagine what they do there. 91% of the kids in Storm Lakes Elementary School are minority kids. 91%. It's the middle of rural Iowa. And so I was at a town hall meeting there, and I had a teacher say to me, all my kids, look, they don't know how to speak English. They were raised here. They were brought here by their parents. Their parents have assimilated here. They're members of the community. They speak English. They all this thing. I said, so you can't send them home. I said, well, you're looking at it the wrong way. I said, look at it this way. Why do people come here from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador? Because their economy is not nearly as robust as ours, not creating good paying jobs, and their democracy, such as it is not functioning at a particularly high level. Freedom is not particularly high. All those things that would cause you to come and seek a better place here. And one of the reasons the tide of immigrants keeps coming is because nothing is changing down there. Now think about this idea. There are roughly 6 million people from those countries here in America, and we send them all home. They all speak English. They all know what the rule of law is. They understand what freedom is. They understand what capitalism is. You know what gift we've just given the state of Mexico, the state of Guatemala, the state of Honduras, and El Salvador? We have now done something to actually help the stem the tide of immigrants by implanting people who have the great American experience. People come over here for an immersion as to what it's like to be American. We have now just given this gift to all of these people. And we're going to say, go home and change your country. Go home and bring what you learned here and make Mexico a better place. Make El Salvador a better place. And some people say, well, I don't want to go. Well, you know what? There are consequences sometimes, but take the gifts you've been given and do something good for this country by helping your country. And no one seems to talk in those terms because, again, we're not thinking through it. We're thinking emotionally. Oh, what about these poor people? We're not sending them, back to a prison camp We're sending them to Mexico. People go to Mexico all the time. We're giving them an opportunity to do something great for both countries. And that's the way I think we should start to look at this and see that this is a positive thing, both for America and for Central and South America.
So, the next area I want to talk about is federalism. That sounds like an extremely boring college word to a lot of people. It sounds that way to me. But when people think of separation of powers, we think of the three branches of government, and we think of like a three-lane highway. Executive, you're in this lane. Judicial, you're in this lane. And then you have the judicial, legislative, executive, three different lanes, and they don't cross. Federalism is basically separation of powers turned vertically. And it's the lane for the federal government and the lane for the states. If you look at our Constitution, which is an owner's manual for our republic, it is a how-to manual, how to govern yourselves. And in that manual, it says, the Constitution says, Congress, you have all these powers, and it lays them out. It says, judiciary, you have all these powers, and it lays them out. And then it says, executive, you have all these powers, and it lays them out. Everything not laid out or mentioned, if you go back to tab 10, that's the last of the Bill of Rights. That's the 10th Amendment. Anything not listed in the Constitution is reserved to the states. As an Attorney General, we deal with a lot of these executive actions and orders that you just talked about, Senator. But a lot of these actions don't come directly from the President. They come from people that he puts in certain places of power and authority. So the next question goes to if these people understand the role of the federal government as it relates to the role of the states. What questions would you ask of appointees to, say, agencies like the EPA, the NLRB, the DOJ, or any of the other multitude of ABC alphabet agencies in the federal government? What would you want to know from those people in those agencies?
Well, I mean, I would put people in those agencies that understand that you have powers that are enumerated in the Constitution and that we have laws passed pursuant to them. And when we don't have laws passed pursuant to those, when we have overreach, then again, that's a place number one. We have to go through a lot of the laws that we passed in Washington D.C. and determine, where we've. And I always think of education being the first one of those. I mean, education is really not within the purview of the federal government. It's something that was really historically and constitutionally sort of left to the states. And so I would first try to get laws changed. So you can talk about what are you going to do with appointments, but appointments usually are trying to, if you're doing what I said earlier about sticking to the law, then you're going to have appointments. If they follow the law, the law may be the problem, not the appointments, is what I'm saying. And so, I look at education as the perfect example of this. I came into the Congress, as I mentioned, back in 1991, and if you looked at all education spending, the federal government comprised 2% of all education spending, primary and secondary. It's now 11%. And the principal reason is we passed more and more federal laws to go and try to tell the states how to run their education system, and we did it by giving them money to get them to follow the strings that we put in place. So I think the first order of business is to look at the laws that are in place and see what we can do to reform those laws, and then secondly, look to see within what laws are there, is there some way we can change some of the regulations to limit the federal oversight and control where it's inappropriate. And there's certainly a lot of areas where that is the case, but it really is more than just appointments. It's trying to change the law. And then you've got some other issues with respect to the 10th Amendment, and this is sort of a hot issue, if you will, in the race right now, and that is, what can the states do and what can't they do? And obviously, I'll just lay it straight out here. There are 3 or 4 candidates in this race who have said that the issue of marriage is a 10th Amendment issue, that the states can do whatever they want to do, and in fact their position is that the states should be able to decide this marriage issue, and if the states want to do same-sex marriage, that's fine. I have taken the position that states do not have the right to do that. And the reason I do is because I don't believe the states have unlimited rights to do whatever they want to do, any more than the federal government has the right to do whatever they want to do. And I'll use as an example. Now, if you say that the state has the right to define marriage between a man and a woman, does that mean they could define it between a man and 3 women? Is that okay? Could they define it between family members? Is that okay? Could they, and at what point do you say it's not okay? And at what point do you say the state can't do that? Why? Well, Abraham Lincoln said it best: the state don't have the right to do wrong. There's a higher law that we're accountable to, and that's the natural law. Martin Luther King wrote a letter from a Birmingham jail that said there are just laws and unjust laws. And unjust laws are laws that do not comport with God's law or the natural law. And I would say if you are a state trying to do things that does not comport with the natural law, you do not have the right to do that. And that we should say that there is a limit. And if you don't have that opinion, then I think you are much more of a big government person than you thought you were. Because then the state has absolute right to do whatever the heck they want to do to you. And in my mind, they don't. In my mind, there are limits on what any government can do to you. And that limit is the natural law. That limit is the moral law that we are all held accountable to. And we have people in this race who don't believe that. And I would say that they're more big government than any of them. And even though they argue for limited government, they are actually for a more powerful government than anything I would contemplate. And so I use this example of the left goes crazy, so I always use it because I love to go the left crazy. I said, can the state redefine water as H3O? Does the state have the right to do that? And the answer is no, because it's against the natural law. That's not what water is. And the state doesn't have the right to define something inconsistent with what it is, and we know it to be. And that's where I come down. And that's some have suggested states have the right to have marijuana laws and all these other things. I don't believe that is the case, and that is a big difference. And before you answer, my son came in, so he was kind enough to come, so I'm going to introduce him. That's my son John is here. So John, just to let everybody know we're here.
Awesome. All right, we're going to go quick, and we're going to go through this as quickly as possible because I want to get through as many of these questions and topics as we can. Energy and the EPA. There have been a number of rules coming out of the EPA. Some of you think that's the Environmental Protection Agency. I call it the Eliminate Prosperity Agency. Because a lot of these rules are made without any consideration of the economic impact. While we certainly want a livable environment, and the environment should be of utmost priority, sometimes it seems to be completely devoid of even thought over there. There was a recent ruling coming out on WOTUS, Waters of the U.S., and let's just simplify it, and then Clean Power Plant's another one that came out, but WOTUS, Waters of the U.S., basically would be like the Mississippi River or a major lake that borders 2 states, or a stream or tributary. Imagine if you own a piece of property with a ditch in the back, and 2 months out of the year that ditch is filled with water because of the rainy season. And because you happen to be adjacent to a Waters of the U.S., maybe 5 miles away, you may have to get a federal permit from the EPA in order to build or use your property the way you want. I jokingly refer to WOTUS as LOTUS, lands of the U.S., because it's a land grab, ultimately, taking your land through administrative fiat. This begs the question, Senator, as President, how would you balance the need protect a livable environment with the reality of the cost of regulations on businesses and families?
I think this is the area the President has gone completely over the deep end. I mean, ozone, mercury, Clean Coal Initiative, Waters of the U.S., carbon dioxide regulation. I mean, just excessive, and he's done, this goes back to the earlier point we talked, he's done it all without changing one law. All of this is without changing one law because of the abuse of the regulatory authority, rewriting regulations that are either inconsistent in some cases, outside, not even considered by the Congress. I mean, I assure you, when the Congress was passing the Clean Air Act decades ago, they were not thinking of carbon dioxide. I guarantee you, they were not thinking of carbon dioxide as a pollutant. Yet, the Obama administration has figured out some way to do so. This is where I talk about the ability of the President to go in there and look. Every one of these regulations, every single one of them, is excessive and is destructive of our ability to, I would argue, help the environment. and help the environment overall in the world. I use this example that the President's policies, all of these policies that I've listed, all of them are, well, killing the coal industry in this country. But more profoundly, as far as more jobs, killing manufacturing. We've lost 2 million manufacturing jobs in the United States. And a lot of it is because of the regulations that have been put in place by this administration or the threat of that going forward. And where have those jobs gone? Those jobs have gone to Mexico, they've gone to India, they've gone to Vietnam, and of course they've gone to China. Well, I looked at China as an example of this. China, for every dollar of GDP that they have, they produce 5 times the amount of pollution as we do. So for every dollar of production, they produce 5 times the amount of CO2 and other noxious gases. And I don't think CO2 is a noxious gas. Okay? CO2 is no more noxious because you're all breathing it, right? And you're exhaling more of it. So if you really are concerned about the environment, what would you be doing? Would you be passing all these regulations that drive jobs to countries that have very weak to no environmental regulations, would pollute much more profoundly the earth, and drive up CO2 emissions? Or do you have the idea that what we should be aggressively doing is trying to take all of those jobs that we sent over and then some, bring them to the country where you can produce them with an environmentally sensitive way? Look, before all of these regulations were put in place, the United States had some of the toughest, maybe even the toughest environmental regulations in place. The 5-to-1 ratio is before any of the Obama regulations have even been put in place. We're talking about profound reductions in emissions if we can relocate things here. And I've heard nobody on the other side can refute that. They can't refute it. They're not about global warming. They're not about helping the environment. They're about controlling you. They're about wealth redistribution, particularly in the United Nations and this president, redistributing your wealth to the rest of the world. That's what this is about. And so we have a president who has a very clear agenda that he will not tell you. He'll say he's all about the environment. He's all about reducing global warming. If you want to reduce global warming, you would make sure that every job went to China would come back here. Every single one of them. And that's what I'm going to do.
So I have about 6 other areas I want to touch on. So I'm going to do what I said I wasn't going to do. Let's go through them as quickly as possible. And if you're going to do a follow-up at the end, I'm going to give you the last couple minutes. ObamaCare. That's the question.
Yeah.
I'm keeping it short.
Here's the cool look. You should be encouraged. And there's not much encouraging coming out of Washington. But you need to be encouraged by this. The House and Senate passed a repeal of ObamaCare. They defunded all of ObamaCare. And they sent it to the president's desk. Now, we have folks running for president who say that there was a surrender caucus and nobody wanted to repeal Obamacare but him. Well, that just turned out not to be the case, because without him, they repealed Obamacare. And they did it in a way that the rules of the House and Senate allowed you to do it. And I know some people go out and talk about we have an abusive government and we have all these abuses and people don't follow the rules and people don't follow the rule of law. And then they go out and try to advocate for things that don't follow the rules. Well, the rules are there. Frankly, the rules in the Senate are there to keep the government small. They haven't done a very good job of it, but that's what they're there for. Make it hard to pass things. I'm for those rules. I think it should be hard to pass something in Washington. But in this case, they were able to get Obamacare repealed and all the money gone. And why I said you should be encouraged is if Rick Santorum is elected president, then when they pass that the next time, I'll sign it instead of you.
So, one quick question is relevant to this community because several years ago, Boeing chose this as another one of its homes. And the unions came in and were upset because they were leaving Washington State. The National Labor Relations Board threatened to prosecute that business decision. So I'll cut straight to the chase. But I know you come from Pennsylvania, and I know that you've had to get elected in that environment. So I'd be very interested to hear your answer. What are your views on the roles of unions and how they operate in the free market? Like, states like South Carolina?
Well, as you know, there's been a dramatic decline in private sector unions. The only increase in union organizing has been through the government. And I'm of the opinion that the federal government does it right when it comes to unions, believe it or not, because in the federal government employees don't have the right to negotiate wages and benefits. I don't know if you knew that or not. The federal government doesn't give that right to union employees because they thought it was an unequal bargaining power, that they didn't want the union to have the ability to use their resources to get members of Congress elected or not elected based upon whether they were going to give concessions to the union. Well, if it was good enough for Washington, it should be good enough for every other level of government. And so I think from the standpoint of private sector unions, public sector unions, that we should track on to how the federal government unions operate. With respect to private sector unions, they're becoming almost, I hate to say irrelevant, but they're a very, very small percentage. And now you're seeing even some northern states like Wisconsin, like Michigan. Imagine Michigan passing a right to work statute. That would have been inconceivable 20 years ago. But now they've looked here, and they've looked at your success in attracting workers, and they've seen that those statutes are no longer viable to be able to let you compete for jobs that can go anywhere, not just in the country, but anywhere in the world. And so I think we'd be doing a favor to a lot of state legislators. I know I have a lot of friends in the Pennsylvania State Legislature, and they'd love to get rid of right to work. They're really concerned. One of them's here. They'd love to get rid of right to work, but some come from areas where that would be a really, really tough vote for them to do. So I think we might be doing them a big favor. I didn't feel this in the past, but I think we should be doing them a big favor and maybe removing the provisions that actually trigger right to work laws in the states and at the federal level.
And I read this on the internet, so it must be true. But I read that in the last census, 9 union states lost congressional districts to 9 right-to-work states. I need to fact check that, but it feels right.
It's absolutely true.
Real quick, one other issue, this is a quick answer. Gitmo. South Carolina was one of 3 states listed as impossible, Charleston specifically was listed as impossible repository for the terrorists being detained in Gitmo, Guantanamo Bay. I sent a letter with the other 2 AGs to the president, obviously asking them not to do this. What say you?
I think Gitmo has served a tremendous purpose. I would not be released. Anybody that's in Gitmo now probably needs to be in Gitmo for a long, long time. And what we've seen is that everybody released from Gitmo, almost, well, not most, but a lot of them have turned up back on the battlefield. It's essential to have it, and it's essential to have it in a place where they can never be a threat to the mainland, to the people here in this country, and therefore having them on a military base that is not proximate to any civilian population is the perfect place for them.
I'm down to my last 2 questions, and I know we're getting close to the end. I'm conscious of your time, but because we are in Charleston and are at the Citadel, these questions are indirectly related. Obviously, last summer, Charleston, South Carolina, the country was dealt a horrible blow when a young man walked into a church and 9 people worshiping were massacred. It fed into a national debate. We've all followed, from Ferguson up to Baltimore to New York. I mean, throughout the country, there have been a number of instances where you had something like that, whether it was a law enforcement officer involved shooting or whether it was a massacre of a mentally ill, deranged person. It has started a debate. This is part law enforcement, part Second Amendment, part mental health question. As president, you obviously are limited in what you can do on the state level, but you can set the tone, and that's what this question is geared toward. Obviously, we want to promote law enforcement, men and women laying their lives on the line every single day, and we want to know what kind of president we're going to have. We want to know if the president we're going to have is going to, what they would do to lift up law enforcement and instill public confidence in law enforcement, at the same time while putting the brakes on knee-jerk reactions to go straight to gun grabs or go to gun regulation when we already have laws on the books that are not being enforced, and when we have mental health issues that really need to be addressed. What are your views on that generally? And I'll let you, and I have one question after that.
It's a multifaceted.
It is.
It's a multifaceted question. Obviously, guns, let me talk about the Second Amendment. Remind everybody that the founders put the Second Amendment second for a reason. They could have put it 8th or 9th, but they didn't. They put it second because it was important. And they thought it was important, very important, right under the First Amendment, which was enumerating the protections of the right to speak, the right to your faith, the right to assembly, all of those, foundational rights. And they saw the Second Amendment as a way to protect those rights. And the Second Amendment is not for hunters. The Second Amendment is the ability to protect yourself and to protect, clearly at that time, to protect yourself from a tyrannical government. Remember, they just overthrew one. And they had guns to do so. And so that's what the Second Amendment is there to do. And in today's world, obviously, we're not going to outgun the federal government, so I'm not sure that that's necessarily a relevant protection, but certainly the first one is, which is to be able to protect yourself. And particularly in today's world. Today's world, we have a president who's not going to keep us safe. He pursues all these ridiculous ideas that somehow if we pass some laws that's going to create difficulty for law-abiding people to access guns, and we're going to do something about it. You know what he's done? He's been the best salesman for guns in the history of the United States of America. Barack Obama has done more to proliferate guns than any other person in the history of our country. And that just tells you how upside down this president is with just about everything he proposes. The fact is that people in America today are afraid for their security because we have a president who's not keeping us safe from radical terrorists, and who's not talking about, just to your point about law enforcement, is not talking about the cause of the problem of the shooters that are not terrorists. And the ultimate foundational problem is the foundational problem when it comes to our criminal justice system and the violence that we see, or our schools, or our healthcare system, or our economy. It's the breakdown of the family and the lack of fathers in the lives of a lot of our children in this country. That is the foundational principle, focal point that this president, who had a unique opportunity to do something, opportunity to speak into a community that he was a community organizer. He came from the poor communities of Chicago and had an opportunity to speak to those poor communities, and he chose not to. He chose to ignore what every sociologist on the left and right are now coming forward and saying, look, yes, the economy is difficult and it's harder for people economically in some ways, and our education system needs to be reformed, all those things, but they're all saying the same thing. Unless we start dealing with the fact that the majority of children in America today are being raised without a father in the home, we are kidding ourselves that we're going to have any kind of real impact on any of these problem areas in our society. And so, as a president, you have my commitment that I'm not going to use my bully pulpit to call out police officers or to call out global warming, which is what this president has spent most of the time when he talks to the American public about. I'm going to talk about the importance of families. I'm going to talk about the importance of building a culture that can be supportive of children with a stronger nuclear family, a strong extended family, and a stronger role for churches and educators and businesses, and yes, even the popular culture, to be reinforcing of the values that we know will keep children healthy, safe, and give them an opportunity for prosperity. So that's
And I want to apologize for that disjointed, multifaceted question to both you and the audience. It was 3 questions crammed into one for time's sake, and I wanted to try to find a way to shoehorn them all in because Charleston has been at the epicenter of a lot of things.
And by the way, just to that point, I was here during that time, and I had the honor, it was an honor, to attend Sunday services at Mother Emanuel the Sunday after that. And the spirit that I saw in